Hello and welcome to Denver Data Web's Digital Strategy Chat. We are a uh, we are a digital strategy company. We help our clients overcome their unique challenges with a goals-focused approach to web development, web design, and digital marketing. I'm Sarah Joswiak. I'm the digital marketing analyst at Denver Data Web, and here we have Tom and David. Tom, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Tom DeGurlia, president and founder out here at Denver Data.
And David.
I'm David Zonka, digital strategist at Denver Data Web. Thanks.
All right, and we have a pretty cool topic for you today. Today, we're going to discuss what's in a name, and that refers to your company or your business name. Naming your business is arguably one of the most important aspects in starting your business. So your business name is something that your customers are going to use a lot. It's also the primary carrier for word of mouth referrals, and a good business name is going to resonate with the right audience or your target audience. At Denver Data Web, we work with businesses of all types, and particularly when we work with new businesses, strategizing with our client's business name comes up in our day-to-day more regularly than you think. So we're going to jump into some key points here. Additionally, if you have any questions, please feel free to chime in the comment or the chat. All right, let's get into the first one here. This one pretty much goes without say, but we're going to sound off about it either way because it's a really good starting point. A name that encompasses your brand. David, did you want to start us off on that one?
Well, the name is a big piece of the brand. I think some folks might think about that sort of thing in very small terms, like, hey, logo, name, and that's brand, and that's all right. Your name is a big piece of that. And it's gonna be like the entry point into the story of what your company is about too. It's gonna fit into maybe even like your logo and stuff. It may fit into what your services are and how you want to make people wear that right away. It's gonna fit into a lot of things actually.
Yeah.
So I mean, thinking about that in a very meaningful way and how what that's gonna be, that matters a lot.
Absolutely. Tom, did you have anything to say about how the business name?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really important to your brand, and your business name could either be a vehicle to your goals or an obstacle in the way of getting to those goals. And so it really, thinking carefully about how you use your name is really important to the success of your organization.
Yeah, and one thing that we talk about a lot at Denver Data Web is the company culture, and and your business name should encompass that in some way. So that plays in a lot as well. Did either of you have anything to say about that, or should we move on?
I was going to toss in a couple just quick examples, and to contrast something like Anger Digital versus Caring Digital as two different names. The connotation that's carried away is very different.
Yeah. And unless you're trying to convey that angry aspect, it's
right. Which it probably has a market. It's probably not a huge one, but rock bands and stuff.
Yeah, true.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move on to the next one. A name that does not pigeonhole your brand. And you may think Denver Data Web, you have the name Denver in your name. You are pigeonholing yourself to one location. But also we do a lot of business in the Denver area. So that is a big part of our brand, at least at the moment. Additionally, actually, I'm going to wait on that. David, did you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, and it really, what does it do to fit your needs? Like it may be that you want to pigeonhole yourself because when we say pigeonhole, we mean maybe you want to be confined to a smaller audience. Maybe you want to target a smaller audience. Maybe you want to focus on a local audience because that might be what you're well suited to. Niching down is like a business strategy where you focus on a smaller net addressable audience that you can help, so that you can better align what you're able to do specifically to those people's needs. I mean, a different strategy might be, we help everybody everywhere. And, if you have the capability to do that, that'd be great because the net addressable audience then is huge and a lot of opportunity, right? But having that well tailored to what you're capable of doing well means that you can serve your customers well, and then you focus on the audience that needs precisely that. Means they're going to hopefully be able to see how you can help them, and then your name as part of your brand can be an excellent vehicle for kickstarting that conversation, that connection to those audience, right? So, if you primarily serve people in a particular region, having that region in your name makes it pretty obvious to those folks, like, hey, I'm looking for somebody local and it looks like they serve people in our area. Maybe I should talk to them. So I think that's definitely a big consideration.
Exactly. And to be fair, we do work nationally within the United States, but the core of our work is within the Denver area.
Well, I was gonna add to to that statement along the same lines as your point is that as a company grows, it's not uncommon that happens, that the name you picked initially doesn't necessarily serve the long-term goals you found out you had. And expansion is one of those, where you could very well niche in a locality, but find out 23 years later that you were more appropriate for an international community. So, and so it pays to think about your brand, your naming early on so that it serves you well over the lifetime of your company. But often that doesn't happen and you don't necessarily know the future. So sometimes you do have to change regardless.
Sarah, I got one for you here with naming and brand and business objectives. You probably already know about this because everybody, probably should know this, that Sarah is an expert on Google My Business and how to leverage that for digital marketing. And so that's why we do a lot of that for our customers in digital marketing. But I read an interesting piece talking about how many businesses in the last few years have been taking advantage of how Google My Business works and actually rebranding their company and the name of their firms to optimize how they show up in Google My Business based on the keywords and the structure in the naming, that from a ranking standpoint. So like some of these law firms, whatever, there's like, we're a Colorado injury law firm, that's how people are searching for it. And they sit on top of the Google My Business rankings and the local packs and stuff like that. That name for their company sounds kind of cheesy. It's not very clever, like Backus and Schenker, or, we're the strong arm, all these guys that you're about in Colorado. Colorado injury law firm sounds rather bland, and yet they're killing it from a digital marketing standpoint. That's a really interesting strategy.
Well, what it does,
pigeonholing by making it seem like they only work with one, unless they do only work with one type of.
Well, and I think to the extent that is really what they do, nailing down a name that is the exact keywords that somebody might enter when they're searching really aligns you well with what they're thinking, even if you don't really do what they're imagining. People will make that presumption if you come back if your name is the search terms they just use, they're automatically going to think you're the best at that, or at the very least extremely well versed.
Exactly. And in the past, and I've mentioned this on previous chats, I've worked with in the natural foods industry. And Tom, what you were saying, like sometimes the company grows and needs to change. I've worked with companies, they offer one product and one product only. So the name of the company is that product. And when you do want to expand, sometimes it goes above and beyond what that product offers. So that comes into play a lot too, but you won't necessarily know that. When you're starting a company, you do tend to think small. So rebranding does happen. And it's these same key points go into rebranding as well. Do we want to talk about that one still, or are we going to move on next one?
I think we move on.
Okay, cool. This one is obvious, although the rules may not be as obvious. We want to make sure that we're following laws and regulations when it comes to naming a company. And this can vary from industry to industry. But in general, there's a lot. Make sure that you're not advertising falsely or trying to mimic another company. David, did you have any other examples of laws and regulations that go into naming your business?
I don't have a very great grasp of trademark and intellectual property laws, but I gather that business names need to follow the regional or federal laws wherever you might be in the world for trademark infringement kind of stuff, right? It's always an interesting thing in my mind to see another company that's might be in Europe or something where it's not as an overlap with here, has like the exact same name, but then the internet, like those boundaries don't really exist, geographically speaking, like they might have in the past. And from a business development standpoint, working that sort of thing, and all the places I have over years, like, getting emails for inquiries and things like that. And it's for a company that's like halfway across the world. They just happen to have the exact same name, right? And people, that's funny. But probably not funny for a person if they're a small and upcoming business and like, hey, I got this great name for my business, and then somebody else has got it, and then you discover, wow, everybody thinks they're us. This isn't good.
That's funny because I've got a friend who incorporated and went out and registered the name, and the Secretary of State doesn't even prevent infringement. That's not their job, and so he literally registered the exact same name as an existing company, and it's been a real challenge for him. Because not only is he fighting with another person for this name, but he's also got, it hurts the other person, but it also hurts him because there's already someone else they can mistake him for.
And in addition to copyright infringement, there can also be like the word doctor can only apply to certain companies, whether you really are a doctor or you're so far away from a doctor that no one is going to get it confused. Like Rug Doctor is a company because doctors don't work with rugs. Whereas
right. We know this is not a medical doctor.
If it's something that's a little more clinical, but not quite doctor, like you wouldn't see a tan doctor tanning salon because that does feel a little more clinical and you are undressed in a small room. And I think it would be very misleading to be
tanpeeper.com.
What, say it again?
Tanpeeper. Sorry, that would be a bad name. That's an example of a bad name. That would not instill confidence.
So there are laws against using certain business names that would create false claims. So using the word doctor in a business like that would be considered a false claim because it would give off the illusion that a doctor is recommending those things, whereas that is not true and not allowed.
Or realtor, which is really very specific about how it could be applied because it's a trademark.
Exactly. And in the same realm of that leads us into the next one. And this one also should probably go without saying. A lot of these are pretty self-explanatory or common sense. But don't have a business name that is offensive or that scares anyone unless it's part of your branding. If you have a haunted house, you may want a name that scares people because you want to attract that core audience. But in general, yeah, have a name that is friendly and doesn't harm people or your audience.
Angry nursing might not be a good choice.
Yes. David, did you want to talk about that one?
There's kind of like a maxim that I subscribe to, not Maxim Magazine, that I didn't use the right words there. There's a general philosophy that I adhere to with content marketing, that sort of thing. There's 3 things you got to do if you want to get traction in digital marketing on the internet with your content, which is you either got to help people figure out how to solve a problem, you got to make them laugh, or you got to scare them. If you're not doing any of those things, your content's going nowhere. Scaring is like, it's one of those easy ones where it's just easy to do. It's just hanging out there. It's like, yeah, if we just scare them, we're going to get people to take action, right? But, it doesn't feel so good. And it's not creating the kind of relationship you really want. If you're helping somebody, they appreciate that. You make somebody laugh, man. I mean, we all want to laugh more, and just it feels good, right? So that you're helping people there in a different way. You're scaring people, maybe you're helping them because you're getting them to take action, but are they really going to appreciate you for it? It's like, oh, because so many people think scare tactics these days. What a great marketing tactic, right? I feel like that fits in here too. Like, yeah, I mean, you could do something scary with your name to try and get people to take action, but is it really the kind of tone you want to take with these people who might be your clients or customers? Is that the kind of relationship you want? So yeah, I definitely gotta agree. Don't scare people. It's not worth it.
Or offend people. There's actually a vitamin shop in the Denver area called BNS Nutrition, which makes you think, like, do they not believe in what they offer? And I think the tactic with that is they do want to be a little offensive and they do want to get your attention. But does it backfire? Judging by how many times I see people go in and out of there, I would say it did. I've never seen anyone go into that store.
Right. You don't want to have a name that makes someone feel awkward. Yeah, or conjures prejudice, that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah.
Right, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Oh, hang on, Sarah. You might be having some bandwidth. We're gonna take a beat, see if that clears up.
It may be me, but yeah, I was hearing it started sounding a little tinny for a second there.
You know, sometimes I'd love to just do a little bit to like promote my internet service provider, which I won't because that wouldn't be good. But it's great having gigabit internet. It's pretty solid. I remember the days where I didn't have that, and I'm always wondering, am I still going to be connected to the internet when I have these meetings later?
Is that fiber?
It is. Yeah, when you have gigabit, it has to be fiber connection.
That's not a brand name, is it?
I guess it could be. I think some of these other big name, not to be mentioned, providers can provide that, and I guess it still goes through like coaxial or whatever. But
no, I think, to my knowledge, unless you pull some strings, this is the only actual fiber available.
Mm-hmm.
At least at the moment. I mean, they can run it to your facility, but it's really nice being able to get to the internet all the time.
Especially nowadays when it's just, basically all of this is online stuff. I guess a lot more is going to be in person still, but I don't really envision it being all the way in person with most of these things. Like, it's just too convenient.
Right. Some things I was thinking about as Sarah was talking, the one that I just kind of touched on briefly was finding a name that is free of any kind of negative connotation. I think it's kind of in line with what we just talked about. Things that invoke a particular prejudice, and because certain terms tend to carry connotations with people, and sometimes it's not. You would have no idea what people feel that way and why. But you want to be really careful not to use a word that has a negative, that evokes a negative feeling from somebody, and that. I think to some degree that's led a lot of these very abstract names that we see, currently for websites and modern companies, but also probably drove a lot of the huge amount of effort that went into picking names like Kodak and that kind of thing, where they really did a lot of focus group to make sure this name doesn't anywhere in their current or future target market offend somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the age of political correctness, right? How that applies to marketing. And when you decide to very actively, intentionally go against that wave, can be pretty pronounced, and have a lot of impact. But it's such a gamble move, right? I mean, that could just backfire horribly and just fall deadpan and like, oh, okay, you're trying to be edgy, cool,
Right. Sanka is a brand that was famously repurposed. That was an 80s brand of decaffeinated coffee that had not a good connotation. And they have since rebranded they sold the name. I don't know the whole story here because it's actually really pretty entertaining finding the facts. I think that they've made success out of it, but it is a product that has nothing to do with decaffeinated coffee. And so it's kind of in effect, I think there may be a tie-in conceptually to that. So that's a case where they took a brand that had a lot of name recognition, but that name recognition wasn't associated with a positive experience.
Poor for Sanka. Poor outcome. So certainly being unique and memorable is pretty important there, right? So, we talk about having like a positive impression. Generally when people have a positive impression, like they're gonna think, hey, this is a brand that I want to continue interacting with. Sarah, glad you could make it back in here. Hey, we love internet, right? So we're talking about memorable and unique names and what that means to branding. So I'll turn it back over to you.
I don't know where you guys were because
we literally just open it up. So you can take that wherever you feel like. What are your thoughts on memorable and unique names and how that's beneficial for branding?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, your name is going to be what the main carrier for when people refer you to other refer you to others. So having a name that people can remember, not only so they can share it, but so they can remember it and use it again, is really, really important, because as we've kind of mentioned before, word of mouth marketing is the most profitable. So being able to have something that works in that way is really, really good. And then also, if like we talked about, I think we talked about this also before, if the silly commercials that people remember and they continue to talk about, having that name that people can pull out of the air and share with each other, that's really, really important to growing your brand and to getting more business. So, I mean, people, you can bookmark something and go back to it and remember the company in that moment. But if the company is going to grow and people are going to share it and talk about it, you want to have a very memorable name.
Yeah, and it's often a difficult.
Oh, go on.
I was going to say it's often a difficult balance between memorability and niche. That often the memorable name tends to be something that's really a generic word, which then might get confusing to some people because there's other things with similar naming.
Yeah.
But if you go too niche, then you've got something that isn't nearly as memorable.
Yeah, and that leads us right into you want to have a company name that isn't going to be confused with someone else. And a really, really great example of this, I'll start this one off. Also right here in Colorado, there are 2 restaurants called Capital Grill. One is spelled Capitol and one is spelled Capital. One of them is a very, very nice fancy steakhouse and one of them is a little diner. And the 2 places are probably like maybe 15 miles away from each other. But every time anyone mentions it, you have to specify, is it this one or is it this one? And that's confusing. It's probably, I mean, I know which one came first, but it's probably wasn't really the best choice for the other one because there's always that confusion.
I've got another example.
Yeah.
Brothers Bar and My Brothers Bar in Denver,
oh, yeah.
which are not the same at all. And they're absolutely competing in the same space. To my knowledge, the rule of thumb for intellectual property, which this touches on that as well, if you're that you cannot take somebody else's name if it is deceptively similar to the same market. Meaning, if somebody could mistake you, if you're one of your customers could mistake them for you and give your work to them, that is infringement. But I've also noticed that the burden of enforcement falls on the person who owns the brand, which means often people don't challenge it. But the point that I think you made that's really well taken is if you've got the same name as somebody else, they're not going to remember who you are. They're going to have a hard time finding you at the right time.
Yeah. You don't want to send somebody to the diner when you want them to meet you at the steakhouse or the other way around.
What about length of name and in regards to memorability and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, you definitely don't want a name that's overly complicated or hard to remember, or going back to the referral, a name that's hard to share. So having a name that this also may seem really straightforward, but you don't want a name that is super overly complicated. And David, I know you have a lot to say about this one, so why don't you start us off?
Yeah, you want to strike a balance. I think there's often a desire nowadays, to come up with some kind of name that can be used for domain names and web stuff. We'll probably touch on that concept too. And so you've had this phenomenon over the last 10 years ago where I think there was a phase where everything was more random names, and now we're getting back to more like actual words in names. I'm trying to think of examples, but okay, here's a couple. I'm going to name drop a couple products, right? These are not endorsements. They just have to be on top of mind, right? Conversa is a name of a product for like call tracking and stuff like that. There's a little bit in that name of like conversion maybe, and that's tied to marketing. Yeah, I can see that, right? But it's a made up word, it seems, unless Conversa is a word somewhere. I'm not going to look it up right now. So that's a great way to like capture something that's unique, and you better get the domain name for it. But and maybe it's easy to remember because it's not too long, right? And then there's other names like I don't know, like Robinhood. Isn't that the name of that app for like investing and stuff nowadays? That's in the news a lot. And I think they're having an IPO. Interesting notoriety lately with that. But I get the sense like, all right, Robinhood. They're talking about like robbing the rich, give to the poor. So I'm like, I get it. There's a story there they're telling. It's a completely like natural language word. It's not made up. It's kind of like a name, right? So it's like a proper noun. So like that's also kind of memorable, and it's neat. And it's on the shorter side. And they can tie it to the brand. Very clever. They probably paid somebody a lot of money to give them an idea for that name for that app, right? I think those are great examples of where it can go well, but I think sometimes people go off the deep end with like the uniqueness side. It's like, it's almost like the brand and the company name, the product name, it sounds like some kind of product for like a pharmaceutical, right? They get away with that, but that stuff is crazy, right? Nobody, you remember it if it just works for you, right? But otherwise, I can't remember all the different things out there. And then on the other end, with like the regular name words, the real world name words for like a brand, it starts to sound like the Colorado injury law firm, right? It's like they could just do like CO law firm or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's gonna be background noise, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know if I have the advice there other than like trying to balance that, keep it on the shorter side if possible, but not so short that it's like acronyms or something, right? So that's my take.
Yeah, right. Make a really long name out of the words that you totally ignore. We and us, creative, would not probably carry you very far.
Probably wouldn't.
But you might be able to get the domain name. Probably not, actually. You could get the digital.
I've seen examples of people like use acronyms or like abbreviations as part of it to get something that is pointing towards the concept or what they do. And I think that can be pretty risky, because if people don't immediately understand what the acronym is for, then really it's just noise. It's just like an
Yeah.
unintelligible domain name and company name.
Just another TLA. That's a three-letter acronym.
And then there's the AAA, harking back to the days of the paper yellow pages, where if you want to be visible to people, SEO ranking for the Stone Age, to be ranking well in yellow page books, you have AAA, AAA
Aardvark.
plumbing or something like that, because that shows up at the top of the alphabetical list, right?
Absolute, affordable, automatic something.
Aardvark is the one I remember. That gets you 3 A's like right up front. I'm like, that's funny. Had nothing to do with the plumbing company in any way.
Well, that's my take on names. It's not super compelling, I suppose, but strike a balance. That's the key.
That was actually a really good point, though, because domain name is very much an extremely real consideration, because that, in this day and age, that is your storefront for most people. And so it's critical that you name it something that hasn't already been secured by somebody else where you can't really get it. That's a big consideration. What's that domain name going to be? When they opened it up to, more of the, I guess, Class A, beyond .com, I know that when there was only .com available, there was a pretty big run on those names. Every word that in the universe that's less than 6 or 8 characters has been purchased. And I think as it expanded, that produced more opportunities for people to actually name it something more natural. Yes,
absolutely. And making sure that you have that domain name available really goes back to a name that's memorable and a website that's memorable. And that also ties into being confused with someone else, because if you like someone else's company name and try and name your company similarly and change a few things, there's a good chance that they're going to end up at that other person's website because they have a good domain for it. And I think that one really ties everything we talked about together: having a name that's memorable, a name that resonates with your audience, a name that isn't confused with anyone else, and it's not overly complicated. All of that ties into having the available domain and the easy to remember domain.
Which is why it's really tough to pick a good company name.
Yes, and also an easy to type domain. Like any of our last names as a company name would probably be a little difficult.
Yeah, mine was available completely, but nobody ever remembered it.
Yeah, very true.
If we wanted to start like a consulting firm of scientists, we'd be set. Zonka, Joswiak, and DeGurley at consulting.
.net.
.net, yeah, .ai.
And nobody could ever get to it unless it was on a search engine.
We'd never have anybody with the same name.
And we'd also never have anybody who could type our domain in.
That's funny.
We'd have to buy every domain name that was mistyped, which would be a lot. All right. Well, we've covered a lot today. It looks like we've come to the end of our time here. Look for our digital strategy chat, no longer each week, but on a semi-regular basis, this time on Fridays. We do post on social media when and if we will be having these chats. Be sure to check out our website at denverdata.com, our YouTube channel, which you can now find at denverdata.com/YouTube, and make sure to like and subscribe when you get there. Thanks so much and have a great weekend.